The wolfless girl will never survive the capital. Those words echoed through Liora Vance's mind as armed guards dragged her toward the transport wagon, her wrists bound, her packmates watching with cold satisfaction. 22 years she'd lived as nothing, no wolf, no power, no voice. In the brutal Thorn Peak frontier, where winter killed the weak and only shifted strength mattered, she was already dead in their eyes. But a royal summons had arrived. The Alpha King himself demanded her presence among the eligible women of the realm, not as an honor, as a spectacle, a joke. The girl with no wolf paraded before the most powerful alpha alive. She didn't know it yet, but in 7 days she would break the one rule that kept a cursed king from destroying his entire kingdom. If you want to see how a powerless outcast becomes the only one who can save a monster king, stay until the very end. And if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story reaches. Hit that like button now, because this journey is just beginning. The wagon lurched over frozen ground, each jolt sending pain through Liora's bruised ribs. 6 other women huddled in the transport, all of them carefully avoiding her gaze. She knew what they saw: thin frame, tangled dark hair, clothes patched so many times the original fabric was barely visible. And worst of all, no shift, no wolf, no future. "They say he kills queens," one of the women whispered, a blonde with sharp features and a beta's confident posture. 3 in 5 years, all of them found dead in their chambers with no marks on them. "That's just rumor," another countered, though her voice shook. The crown wouldn't." "The crown does whatever it wants," the blonde cut in. "We're tribute, nothing more. Livestock presented for inspection." Liora pressed herself against the wagon's wall, making herself smaller. This was familiar territory, being invisible, being nothing. At Thorn Peak, invisibility had been survival. The memory surfaced unbidden. Her 14th birthday, the awakening ceremony where every child of age called their wolf forward for the first time. She'd stood in the circle while the pack elders watched, while her parents held their breath with desperate hope. She'd reached inside herself for that other consciousness, that primal power every shifter possessed. Nothing. Again and again she'd tried, sweat pouring down her face, shame burning through her chest. The elders had waited. The pack had waited. And finally, her father's face had crumpled with understanding. "Wolfless," Elder Rourke had pronounced, the word falling like an execution. The first in 3 generations. Her mother had wept. Her father had turned away. And from that moment, Liora Vance had ceased to exist as anything except a mistake, a genetic flaw, a waste of resources in a pack that could barely feed itself through the harsh frontier winters. "We're slowing," someone said, pulling Liora from the memory. The wagon rolled to a stop. Through the wooden slats, she could see massive stone walls rising against a gray sky. The capital, Ironhold, seat of the crown and home to the most powerful pack in the realm. The city sprawled across the valley like a predator at rest, all sharp angles and defensive architecture. This place had never fallen to enemy forces. It had never needed to. Guards in black leather armor opened the wagon. "Out! Now!" The women scrambled down, forming an uneven line. Liora moved last, her legs cramping from 3 days of travel. The guard who'd spoken barely glanced at her before his eyes moved on, dismissing her existence in a heartbeat. They were herded through an iron gate and into a courtyard where dozens of other women waited. Tributes from every pack in the kingdom, all assembled for the selection. That's what the crown called it, as if they had a choice in the matter. Every eligible female between 18 and 25, summoned to stand before the Alpha King while he chose his next queen. His 4th queen, Liora corrected silently. The blonde in the wagon had been wrong about one thing. It was 3 dead queens in 4 years, not 5. Not that the distinction mattered much. "Listen up!" A woman in crimson robes strode into the courtyard, her presence commanding immediate silence. She was older, perhaps 50, with silver streaking through her black hair and scars marking her neck. A warrior once, before whatever had brought her into the crown's service. "I am Magistra Vey. For the next 7 days, you will be housed, fed, and prepared for presentation to His Majesty, Alpha King Ronan Drax. You will be instructed in court protocol, proper address, and the history of the crown. You will be evaluated on deportment, education, and bloodline strength." Her gaze swept across them, cold, and assessing. Most of you will return to your packs when this is finished. One of you will remain as queen. That woman's duty is clear. Produce an heir, support the crown's authority, and above all, maintain the dignity of the throne. She paused. Questions? No one spoke. Good. Follow the attendants to your quarters. Settle in. Training begins at dawn. As the crowd began to move, Magistra Vey's eyes landed on Liora. Just for a moment, something flickered across her expression. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. Then it was gone, replaced by cold professionalism. The quarters were better than anything Liora had known. A shared dormitory, yes, but with real beds, wool blankets, and a fireplace that kept the autumn chill at bay. The other women claimed spaces quickly, forming natural clusters based on pack alliances and social rank. Liora took the bed nearest the door, the least desirable spot, the one most exposed to cold drafts, but also the one no one would fight her for. Did you see that wolfless girl? A voice drifted from across the room. What pack even sent her? It's embarrassing. Thorn Peak, another answered. I heard they did it as an insult, sending the worst they had. Laughter rippled through the dormitory. Liora lay down, turned her face to the wall, and let their words wash over her. She'd heard worse. At Thorn Peak, she'd been called curse-born, defective, a waste of mother's milk. The children had thrown stones. The adults had simply pretended she didn't exist. The only one who'd never turned away was Grandmara, the pack's ancient healer. Too old to shift anymore herself, she'd taught Liora the only skills a wolfless girl could learn: herb lore, wound treatment, how to coax life from reluctant soil. Small magics, really, the kind that didn't require a wolf's power. The kind that kept you useful just enough to stay alive. Don't let them see you break, Grandmara had whispered the night before the royal summons came. You're stronger than they know, stronger than you know. Liora had wanted to believe her. Now, lying in a strange bed in a city built for predators, she just wanted to survive the next 7 days and go home to her invisible life. Dawn came too early. The attendants roused them before sunrise, herding them to a bathing chamber where hot water and harsh soap waited. Liora washed quickly, avoiding the mirror. She knew what she'd see. Too thin, too plain, too nothing. Dress quickly, an attendant ordered, tossing clean clothes onto a bench. You're expected in the Great Hall. The Great Hall proved to be massive, its vaulted ceiling supported by carved columns depicting wolves in various states of transformation. Tapestries covered the walls showing historical battles and legendary alphas. At the far end, a raised platform held a single chair. Not quite a throne, but close enough. Magistra Vey stood before them, her expression severe. Today you learn protocol. How to address the king, how to move in his presence, how to respond if he speaks to you directly. She began pacing. His Majesty prefers formality. You will not speak unless addressed. You will not meet his eyes unless invited. You will not, under any circumstances, touch him without explicit permission. Why? Someone blurted out. What happens if you die? Vey's voice cut like a blade. That's what happens. The king does not tolerate physical contact, ever. Am I understood? Murmurs of assent rippled through the room. Good. Now form lines. We'll practice the approach in courtesy. The day dragged on. Endless repetition of bows and curtsies, memorization of titles and forms of address, lessons on the crown's history that Liora already knew from Grandmara's stories. The old healer had been obsessed with the royal line, particularly the current Alpha King, who'd taken the throne at 19 after his father's sudden death. Ronan Drax, Grandmara had said once, her voice troubled. Strongest alpha in a century, they say. But something's wrong there. Something dark. Liora had pressed for details, but the old woman had gone quiet, as if afraid to speak further. Now, standing in the great hall practicing courtesies she'd never use, Liora wondered what Grandmara had sensed. What darkness could frighten a woman who'd lived through 3 wars and countless winters? You there, wolfless girl? Liora's head snapped up. Magistra Vey was pointing at her. Demonstrate the formal greeting. Every eye turned toward her. Liora felt her face burn as she stepped forward, moving through the motions Vey had demonstrated. A low curtsy, eyes down, hands clasped. Your Majesty, I am honored by your presence. Silence. Then Vey nodded. Acceptable. Return to position. As Liora stepped back, she caught a few surprised faces. They'd expected her to fail. Part of her was surprised too, but Grandmara's training ran deep. The old woman had insisted on proper manners, even in a frontier pack where such things barely mattered. Survive by being useful, she'd said. Even if they hate you, make them need you. The second day brought different lessons: court politics, the major noble families, the complex web of alliances that held the kingdom together. Liora paid attention despite herself. This was information that might keep her alive, even if she'd never be chosen. The crown's greatest threat comes from within, Magistrave lectured. Lord Kael Theron commands the northern territories. He has the wealth, the warriors, and the ambition to challenge for the throne. So far he's remained loyal, but barely. The king's marriage matters because it will produce an heir, securing the succession and removing Kael's best justification for rebellion. "Well, what about the king's curse?" someone asked. The room went dead silent. Vei's expression turned dangerous. "There is no curse. There are only vicious rumors spread by the crown's enemies. You will not repeat such things if you value your lives." But the damage was done. That night, as the women huddled in their dormitory, the whispers started. "My Pax Alpha said something happened to him during his ascension ceremony. Some kind of magic that went wrong. I heard he killed his father, that the old king didn't die naturally at all. My cousin serves in the castle. She says the king never sleeps in his own chambers, that he locks himself away every night, and sometimes they hear, 'Enough!'" The blonde from the wagon, her name was Kara, cut through the chatter. "Curse or not, he's the Alpha King. One of us is going to end up in his bed, and if we're smart, we'll stop trading ghost stories and start figuring out how to survive it." That sobered them. Kara was right. This wasn't about romance or even politics. This was about survival in its most basic form. One woman would be chosen. That woman's life would be bound to a king who apparently couldn't be touched, who'd lost 3 queens in 4 years, who commanded absolute power over a realm held together by fear and force. Liora pulled her blanket tighter and tried not to think about what the selection would actually mean. She wouldn't be chosen anyway. She was the joke candidate, the one sent to make the real options look better by comparison. The third day, everything changed. They were in a courtyard learning dance steps, another pointless courtesy, since Liora would never attend a royal ball, when a commotion erupted at the main gate. Soldiers poured into the castle grounds, their armor marked with the crown's wolf sigil. In their midst rode a man who made every woman in the courtyard stop breathing. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a predator's fluid grace, even mounted. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, and even at this distance, Liora could see the sharp angles of his face, the kind of harsh beauty that seemed carved from stone rather than born. But what struck her most was the absolute silence that followed him. No one spoke, no one moved, as if his mere presence demanded total submission. "His Majesty," Magistrave breathed. Alpha King Ronan Drax had come home. He dismounted in a single fluid motion, handing his reins to an attendant without looking. His eyes swept the courtyard, and Liora felt the weight of that gaze even though it never landed directly on her. Power rolled off him in waves, the kind of concentrated dominance that came from an alpha so strong he'd never had to prove himself twice. Then she saw them. Shadows. They clung to him like living things, writhing at his shoulders, curling around his boots. No one else seemed to notice. Or maybe they were too terrified to acknowledge what they saw. But Liora, who'd spent her whole life being invisible, who'd learned to observe from the margins, saw them clearly. The curse was real. Ronan's gaze continued across the courtyard, dismissing the assembled women in seconds. His expression was cold, bored, as if this entire selection was beneath his notice. Then, for just a heartbeat, his eyes landed on Liora. She froze. His expression didn't change. He didn't react at all. But something in those dark eyes, recognition, maybe, or calculation, made her breath catch. Then he was moving past, striding toward the castle entrance with Magistrave hurrying to keep pace. "Tomorrow," his voice carried back, deep and absolutely authoritative. "I'll make my choice tomorrow. Have them ready." Then he was gone, and the courtyard erupted into chaos. "Did you see him? He's terrifying. He didn't even look at us. Not really." "One day? We only have one more day?" Liora stood very still, her heart hammering. The shadows she'd seen, they'd reacted when his gaze crossed hers. Just for a second, they'd reached toward her like dark tendrils testing the air, and something in his eyes had shifted, some calculation she didn't understand. That night, she couldn't sleep. The dormitory buzzed with anxious energy, women trying on different dresses, practicing speeches, forming desperate alliances. Kara held court in one corner, coolly explaining her strategy for catching the king's attention. "He wants strength," she said. "He needs a queen who can match him in power, who can give him strong heirs. So that's what I'll show him: confidence, capability, breeding." Others nodded, adjusting their approaches accordingly. No one asked Liora's opinion. No one expected her to have a strategy. She was the throwaway candidate, the one who'd be sent home first. But she couldn't stop thinking about those shadows, about the way they'd moved like living creatures bound to their master, about the careful distance everyone maintained from the king, the fear in Magistrave's voice when she'd mentioned the no-contact rule. "Don't let them see you break," Grandmara had said. Maybe that's all she could do tomorrow: stand straight, keep her dignity, and endure whatever humiliation came with being dismissed by the most powerful man in the realm. Dawn of the fourth day arrived with cruel brightness. The attendants roused them early, directing them to the bathing chambers where they were scrubbed, oiled, and dressed in formal gowns. Liora's was simple, dove gray, unadorned, cut for someone taller. It hung wrong on her thin frame, but she supposed that was fitting. Even her selection dress marked her as an afterthought. They were lined up by pack status, highest ranking at the front, Thornpeak's sole representative at the very end. Liora stood last in line, watching the others vibrate with nervous energy. Some looked terrified, others determined. A few wore expressions of grim resignation. Magistrave appeared, her face unreadable. "The king will see you in the throne room. You will be presented individually. State your name, your pack, and your bloodline when addressed. Show courtesy. Do not speak out of turn." She paused. "And remember, do not approach him unless commanded. Do not touch him, ever." They were led through corridors Liora had only glimpsed before. Tall windows overlooking dead gardens, tapestries depicting wolves in battle, everywhere the sense of old power and older violence. Finally, massive double doors opened onto the throne room itself. It was vast, cold, built to intimidate. Columns marched down both sides, each carved with scenes of submission and conquest. At the far end, elevated on a dais, sat the throne, and on it, Alpha King Ronan Drax. He looked different in formal dress. Still dangerous, still radiating that bone-deep power, but now dressed in black leather and silver chains that marked his rank. His expression was carved from ice, revealing nothing. And the shadows? They were thicker now, coiling at his shoulders, creeping across the dais like smoke given weight. No one else reacted to them. Liora wondered if she was going mad, seeing things that weren't there. But no, they were real. They had to be real. The presentations began. One by one, women approached the throne, offered their courtesies, stated their names and lineages. Ronan listened to each with perfect, terrible attention. But his face never changed. He asked no questions, made no comments, simply watched with those dark, unreadable eyes until each woman finished and retreated, dismissed with a slight gesture. Liora's turn crept closer. She watched Kara approach with confidence, saw the blonde woman execute a perfect curtsy and speak with clear authority about her Beta bloodline and her pack's proud history. Ronan's expression didn't flicker. He gestured and Kara withdrew, her confidence visibly shaken. Then it was Liora's turn. "Liora Vance of Thornpeak," an attendant announced, his voice making it clear this was the least important presentation of the day. Liora walked forward on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The distance to the throne seemed infinite. Every eye in the room tracked her movement. She could feel their contempt, their confusion about why a wolfless girl had even been included. She stopped at the proper distance and curtsied, keeping her eyes down. "Your Majesty, I am Liora Vance of Thornpeak Pack. I am honored by your attention and grateful for this opportunity to serve." Silence. She waited, still curtsied, barely breathing. According to protocol, she couldn't rise until dismissed. So she stayed frozen in that uncomfortable position while seconds stretched into eternity. "Look at me." His voice cut through the silence like a blade. Leora's head came up before she could think better of it. Ronan was leaning forward slightly, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her want to bolt. Up close, his face was even harsher than she'd thought, all sharp angles and hard lines, handsome in a cruel way. But his eyes, there was something behind them. Not warmth exactly, but calculation, assessment. "You have no wolf," he said. It wasn't a question. "No, Your Majesty." "Yet you're here." "I was summoned, Your Majesty." "By what right does Thornpeak send me a broken candidate?" The words should have hurt. They were meant to. But Liora had been called worse by better people. She kept her voice steady. "I cannot speak to my pack's reasoning, Your Majesty. I can only offer what I am." Something flickered across his expression. Surprise, maybe, that she hadn't crumbled. "And what are you, Liora Vance?" The question felt like a trap, but she'd already come this far. Might as well speak truth. "I am resilient, Your Majesty. I am useful, and I do not break easily." The shadows around him moved, coiling tighter. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd gone too far, that she'd signed her own death warrant with her boldness. Then Ronan leaned back. "You may rise." She stood, her legs trembling with relief. "Tell me something, Liora Vance. Why should I choose you? Why should I take a wolfless woman as my queen when I have dozens of stronger candidates?" The honest answer was that he shouldn't, that this was absurd, that she'd be gone by nightfall and good riddance. But something in his eyes, some test she didn't quite understand, made her answer differently. "Because I am not afraid of you," she said quietly. The room went dead silent. Ronan stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, one corner of his mouth twitched upward. "Everyone is afraid of me." "Yes, Your Majesty, but I am afraid of many things. You are simply one among many. It does not define me." He stood in a single fluid motion, descending the dais with predatory grace. Every guard in the room tensed. The shadows followed him, flowing like dark water across stone. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the silver threads in his dark eyes, could feel the heat and power radiating from him. Close enough that everyone in the room held their breath, waiting for violence. "What else are you afraid of?" His voice was soft now, dangerous. "Starvation," Liora answered honestly. "Freezing, being utterly alone, dying without ever mattering to anyone." "You've thought about death." "I've lived on its edge my whole life, Your Majesty. When you have no wolf, death becomes a familiar neighbor." He studied her with an expression she couldn't read. Then he turned, addressing the room with absolute authority. "I have made my choice." His voice carried to every corner. "Liora Vance of Thornpeak will be my queen." The throne room erupted into chaos. Gasps, protests, the shocked babble of people who couldn't process what they'd just heard. Liora stood frozen, certain she'd misunderstood. Ronan turned back to her. "You will be moved to the Queen's chambers today. We wed in 3 days. Do you accept?" Did she accept? What kind of question was that? She was a wolfless nobody from a frontier pack. He was the Alpha King. She had no power to refuse, no grounds to negotiate. This was happening whether she wanted it or not. But something in his eyes, that calculation, that test, made her understand. He wanted to know if she'd speak truth even now, even when cornered. "I accept, Your Majesty." "Good." He gestured to Magistrave. "See to it. And someone silence this room before I do it myself." The protest died instantly. Ronan moved past Liora without another word, the shadows trailing behind him like a cloak. As he passed, she felt them brush against her, cold, testing, curious. They didn't feel evil exactly, just hungry, desperate. Then he was gone. An attendant swarmed her, pulling her away from the shocked crowd, hurrying her through corridors while voices rose behind them in confused outrage. Liora barely processed any of it. Her mind kept circling back to one impossible truth. She'd been chosen. The girl with no wolf, the throwaway candidate, the joke. She'd been chosen to be queen, and she had absolutely no idea why. The queen's chambers were a gilded cage. Liora stood at the window, staring down at gardens that had been dead for years. Twisted vines choked marble fountains. Flower beds had become graveyards of brown stalks. Even the ancient oak at the garden's heart stood bare and skeletal, its branches reaching toward the sky like broken fingers. "Your Majesty," an attendant's voice came from behind her, tentative and cold. "Your wardrobe has been prepared. Magister Vey requests your presence in the solar within the hour." Liora turned. 3 attendants stood at attention, their faces professionally blank. They'd been assigned to her an hour ago, but none had spoken beyond necessity. She could see the confusion in their eyes, the barely concealed contempt. They served her because they had to, not because they believed she deserved it. "Thank you," Liora said quietly. "I can dress myself." "Protocol requires—" "I can dress myself," she repeated, more firmly this time. The attendants exchanged glances. Finally, the eldest nodded. "As you wish, Your Majesty. We will wait outside." When they'd gone, Liora released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "Your Majesty." The title felt like a joke, something borrowed from someone else's life. Yesterday, she'd been nothing. Today, she wore silk and lived in rooms larger than her entire childhood home. And in 3 days, she would marry a king wrapped in living shadows who'd ordered her never to touch him. She moved to the wardrobe, an enormous thing of carved oak that could have housed a family, and found it filled with dresses in muted colors: gray, slate blue, dove white. Beautiful garments, but subdued. Carefully neutral, as if someone had decided the wolfless queen should fade into the background even in silk. Liora chose the darkest gray, dressed quickly, and emerged to find her attendants waiting with expressions that suggested she'd taken too long. They led her through corridors she was already beginning to recognize, left past the portrait gallery, down the stairs where morning light streamed through stained glass, across the entrance hall where guards watched her pass with undisguised curiosity. The solar proved to be a sitting room with tall windows and uncomfortable furniture. Magister Vey waited there, her expression severe. "Sit." Liora sat. Vey remained standing, circling like a predator assessing prey. "You understand that your selection has caused complications?" "I imagine it has." "Lord Kael Theron arrived this morning. He demands audience with the king. The northern lords are sending ravens. The court is in chaos." Vey stopped directly in front of her. They expected His Majesty to choose strength, power, a queen who could solidify alliances and secure the succession. Instead, he chose you. The words hung between them like an accusation. "I did not ask to be chosen," Liora said carefully. "No, but you accepted. What choice did I have?" "None." Vey's smile was cold. "Which brings us to your education. You have 3 days to learn what most queens spend years preparing for. 3 days to become someone this court can accept, or at least tolerate." She gestured to a stack of books on a nearby table. Court hierarchy, noble genealogies, treaty obligations, border politics. You will memorize all of it. Liora stared at the pile. It would take weeks to read all that, let alone memorize. "I will also teach you how to move through court without embarrassing yourself or the crown," Vey continued. "How to speak without revealing your ignorance. How to survive the next few months until—" She trailed off. "Until what?" Vey's expression flickered. "Until the situation stabilizes." "Or until I die like the others," Liora thought, but didn't say. She wondered if Vey had trained the previous queens too, had given them this same speech, had watched them disappear one by one. "I'll do my best," she said instead. "Your best may not be sufficient, but we work with what we have." Vey moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. His Majesty's rule about physical contact is absolute. You are never to touch him. Not a hand on his arm, not an accidental brush in passing. Nothing. Am I clear?" "Yes." "Good. Because if you break that rule, you won't live long enough to regret it." The door closed behind her, leaving Liora alone with a mountain of books and the weight of impossible expectations. She spent the day reading until her eyes burned. Court hierarchy proved brutally complex. Dozens of noble families, each with their own lands, armies, and ancient grudges. The Therons controlled the north and commanded the largest force outside the crown's direct authority. The Ashfords held the eastern trade routes. The Morvain family guarded the southern border against raiders from beyond the kingdom. And all of them, according to these texts, resented the crown's power while simultaneously depending on it for stability. By evening, Leora's head throbbed with names and titles and political complications she barely understood. She was staring at a genealogy chart, trying to memorize which lord was cousin to which, when a knock interrupted. "Enter!" An attendant appeared. "Your Majesty, dinner is served in the private dining room. His Majesty requests your presence." Leora's stomach clenched. She'd been summoned to dine with the king, alone presumably, since the term private had been emphasized. She stood, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. "Lead the way." The private dining room was smaller than she'd expected, almost intimate. A single table set for two, candles providing soft light, windows overlooking those dead gardens. And standing at the window, his back to her, was Ronan. The shadows were thicker tonight, coiling around him like living smoke. They moved with his breathing, reacted to his presence as if tethered to his consciousness. Liora wondered again why no one else seemed to see them, or if they did, why they never spoke of it. "You're staring," Ronan said without turning. Heat rushed to Leora's face. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." He turned, and his expression was unreadable. "Everyone stares at first. They just learn to hide it better." He gestured to the table. "Sit. We need to talk." Liora sat, acutely aware of the distance he maintained. He took the chair opposite, far enough that they couldn't accidentally touch, even if they both reached across the table. Servants appeared with covered dishes, then vanished like ghosts. "You're wondering why I chose you," Ronan said. It wasn't a question. "Among other things, Your Majesty?" "Stop calling me that when we're alone. My name is Ronan. Protocol requires, I'm the king. Protocol is whatever I say it is." He leaned back, studying her. "I chose you because you're weak." The words hit like a slap. Liora forced herself to meet his eyes. "I see." "Do you?" His smile was sharp. "I don't think you do. The court expects me to choose a powerful mate, someone with a strong bloodline, political connections, an alpha's bearing, someone who would demand respect, accumulate influence, become a power in her own right. And you don't want that. I can't afford it." He gestured, and wine appeared in their glasses, though no servant had approached. The shadows had moved, Liora realized. They'd poured the wine. "My father married for political alliance. My mother was a Theron before she became queen. She brought the northern lords into the fold, secured the border, gave my father the stability he needed to consolidate power." That sounds like a success. It was. Until she decided the throne should have been hers. His voice went flat. "She spent 15 years building a power base, cultivating loyalty, preparing for the moment she could remove my father and rule through me. When he discovered her plans, the betrayal killed him faster than any poison." Liora said nothing. This wasn't in any of the books she'd read. "So you see my problem," Ronan continued. "I need an heir. That requires a queen. But I cannot risk another woman with the power and ambition to threaten my rule. I need someone controllable, someone who won't accumulate dangerous levels of influence." His eyes locked on hers. "Someone weak enough to be harmless. Someone like me." "Exactly like you. No wolf means no real power, no political connections worth mentioning, no family to leverage your position. You're alone, insignificant, and entirely dependent on my continued favor for survival." He raised his glass in mock salute. The perfect queen for a king who trusts no one. The honest cruelty of it took her breath away. He wasn't even pretending this was anything but a transaction. She was livestock, carefully selected for her inability to threaten him. "I see," she said again, keeping her voice level. "And what happens when I fail to produce an heir? When it becomes clear I'm as broken in that regard as everything else?" "Then we'll address it then." He took a drink. "For now, you'll play the role. You'll stand at my side during ceremonies, host dinners I don't want to attend, smile at nobles who despise you. You'll be visible enough to satisfy protocol, but powerless enough to remain harmless. And the rule about touching you?" His expression went cold. "Is absolute. Never, under any circumstances, do you make physical contact, not even in private, not even by accident." "May I ask why?" "No." They ate in tense silence. The food was exquisite, far better than anything Liora had ever tasted, but it turned to ash in her mouth. She'd known she was despised at Thorn Peak, but at least there she'd understood her place. Here, she was a chess piece moved by hands she couldn't see, assigned a role in games she didn't understand. "You're angry," Ronan observed. "I'm practical, Your Majesty. Ronan." The name felt strange on her tongue. "You've been honest about what you want from me. I appreciate that, at least. Lies would be crueler." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or reassessment. "Most women would weep at hearing what I just told you. Most women haven't spent their lives being told they're worthless. I'm accustomed to low expectations." He leaned forward slightly, and the shadows moved with him. "Tell me something, Liora. If you could have anything, power, position, revenge on everyone who wronged you, what would you choose?" The question felt like a test. She considered lying, offering some noble sentiment, but he'd been brutally honest with her. Perhaps she owed him the same. "A garden," she said quietly. "I would choose a garden where things actually grow, where I could make something beautiful instead of just surviving another winter." Ronan stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, he laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no humor. "A garden! Of all the things you could ask for, you want a garden." "You asked what I wanted. I answered honestly." "So you did." He stood, and servants appeared immediately to clear the table. "The gardens outside your chambers are yours to do with as you please. They've been dead for 4 years, but if you can resurrect them, be my guest." "4 years," Liora repeated. "Since your first queen." His expression went carefully blank. "Yes, since Marianne." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Lord Kyle arrives tomorrow to meet you. He'll test you, try to gauge how much influence you might wield. Give him nothing. Show him exactly what you are, powerless and unimportant. The less threat you pose, the safer we both are." "Understood." He left without another word, the shadows trailing behind him like a cloak of living darkness. Liora sat alone at the empty table, processing everything she'd learned. She was here to be weak, to be controllable, to pose no threat to a king so paranoid he'd rather marry nothing than risk another betrayal. And tomorrow, she would meet the man who most wanted Ronan's throne, and convince him she was exactly as harmless as she appeared. She should have been terrified, but instead, as she stood and moved to the window overlooking those dead gardens, she felt something else entirely. Purpose. For the first time in her life, someone had given her a clear task. Survive. Stay powerless. Don't threaten the king. Simple enough goals for a woman who'd spent 22 years being exactly that. The next morning brought rain, cold and relentless, turning the castle grounds to mud. Liora woke to find her attendants already laying out clothes, this time a deep blue dress with silver embroidery at the cuffs. More formal than yesterday, she noted, because today she would meet Lord Kyle. Magistra Vey appeared during breakfast, her expression grimmer than usual. "Lord Kyle requests audience at noon. His Majesty will be present, of course, but you should know what to expect." She began pacing. "Kyle is ambitious, ruthless, and commands the loyalty of half the kingdom's fighting force. He's also Ronan's cousin on his mother's side, which gives him a legitimate, if distant, claim to the throne. And he wants to see if I'm worth deposing the king over," Liora said. Vey paused. "You're more perceptive than I expected." "Yes, essentially. If you appear weak enough, he may decide you're not worth the risk of open rebellion. If you appear to have any real influence over Ronan—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Then I become a target." "Then you become a corpse." Vey's voice was flat. "Kyle doesn't waste time on political maneuvering when a simple assassination will do. 3 of his rivals have died in hunting accidents over the past 2 years. Everyone knows it was him. No one can prove it." Liora set down her cup carefully. "What would you advise?" "Be exactly what you are. A wolfless girl with no power, no connections, and no real value beyond producing an heir. Make yourself boring. Make yourself forgettable. Make yourself not worth killing." "I can do that." "I hope so. Because if Kyle decides you're a threat, there's very little even the king can do to protect you. Ronan's power is immense, but it's not infinite. and Kael has been waiting years for an excuse to move against the crown. At noon precisely, Liora was escorted to a formal sitting room where Ronan already waited. He stood by the fireplace, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. The shadows pooled around his feet, thicker than usual, as if responding to his tension. "Remember what I told you," he said quietly. "Be harmless." Before Liora could respond, the doors opened and Lord Kael Theron entered. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, tall and powerfully built with the kind of handsome features that probably made people trust him right before he destroyed them. Dark red hair fell to his shoulders, and his eyes were the pale blue of winter ice. He wore travel-stained leather but moved with absolute confidence, as if he owned every room he entered. "Your Majesty." Kael bowed to Ronan with perfect correctness that somehow managed to convey contempt. "Thank you for granting me audience." "You demanded it," Ronan said mildly. "I simply chose to honor the demand." "There's a difference." Kael's smile sharpened. "Of course. Forgive my presumption." His gaze shifted to Liora, and she felt the weight of his assessment like a physical thing. "And this must be the future queen. How delightful." "Lord Kael Theron," Ronan said, "may I present Liora Vance of Thornpeak?" Liora curtsied, keeping her eyes down. "My lord, I'm honored." "Are you?" Kael moved closer, circling her like a predator evaluating prey. "Tell me, Miss Vance, may I still call you that, or should I use your new title? What are your thoughts on becoming queen?" "I am grateful for His Majesty's choice and hope to serve with honor." A diplomatic answer, but I asked for your thoughts, not your platitudes. She could feel Ronan's tension from across the room. This was the test. If she showed any hint of intelligence, of capability, of potential threat, Kael would mark her as dangerous. But if she played too stupid, he might see through the act. "Honestly, my lord?" She let her voice shake slightly. "I'm terrified. I don't understand court politics. I have no experience with nobility. I'm just a girl from the frontier who never expected any of this." "A wolfless girl," Kael added, making it sound like a disease. "Yes, my lord." "How extraordinary." He glanced at Ronan. "No offense, cousin, but one wonders at the reasoning. Surely there were more qualified candidates?" "My choice is made," Ronan said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Question it at your peril." "I wouldn't dream of questioning it. I'm simply curious about the strategic thinking involved." Kael turned back to Liora. "Tell me, dear girl, what do you know about the Northern Territories?" "Very little, my lord." "The eastern trade routes?" "Nothing, my lord." "Border security? Treaty obligations? Military readiness?" "I'm afraid I'm ignorant of all such matters, my lord." Kael studied her for a long moment, then threw back his head and laughed. "Ignorant! She admits it so freely. How refreshing." He turned to Ronan, his smile dangerous. "Well, cousin, I must commend your restraint. Most men in your position would choose a queen who could actually help them rule. But you've always had your own way of doing things." "Is there a point to this audience?" Ronan asked. "Or did you ride 3 days through rain just to insult my bride?" "Not insult. Evaluate." Kael's expression hardened. "You know why I'm here. The Northern Lords are restless. They remember when a Theron sat beside the throne, when their voices mattered in the council. They wonder if this new queen will speak for their interests." "She won't," Ronan said flatly. "She has no interest beyond surviving her new role." "So I see." Kael's gaze returned to Liora, dismissive now. "Well, Miss Vance, I wish you luck. You'll need it. Married to a king who—" He paused deliberately. "Who prefers to keep his distance." The implication hung in the air. Ronan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Kael bowed again, that same mocking courtesy. "Thank you for your time, Your Majesty. I'll convey to the Northern Lords that the new queen poses no threat to established power structures. I'm sure they'll be relieved." He left without waiting for dismissal, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. When the sound faded, Ronan released a breath. "You did well." "He thinks I'm harmless." "That's the idea." "But he also thinks you're weak for choosing me." Liora met his eyes. "He basically called you isolated and questioned your judgment in front of me. Won't that embolden him?" "Probably." Ronan moved to the window, staring out at the rain. "But the alternative, choosing a strong queen who might actually threaten his power, would have forced his hand immediately. This way. I buy time. Time for what? He didn't answer. Liora stood there, suddenly seeing the full scope of the game being played. Ronan wasn't just paranoid. He was cornered. Choosing her hadn't been strategy. It had been desperation, the act of a king with no good options, trying to survive in a court full of enemies. The shadows, she said quietly. That's why you can't be touched, isn't it? That's what you're hiding. Ronan turned slowly, his expression dangerous. What did you say? I can see them. The shadows that follow you. They're thicker when you're tense, thinner when you're calm, and they react to touch. That's why you stay isolated, why you keep everyone at distance, because if someone touches you, something happens. The silence stretched between them, heavy with threat. How long have you seen them? His voice was deadly quiet. Since the first day. In the courtyard. And you said nothing. Would you have believed me if I had? He moved toward her with predatory speed, closing the distance she'd been carefully maintaining. The shadows swirled around him like a storm. Do you have any idea what knowledge like that is worth? What Kyle would pay to know for certain that the king is cursed? I'm not going to tell him. Why not? I've given you every reason to betray me. I chose you because you're weak. I made it clear you're nothing but a convenient pawn. So why in all the realms would you protect me? Liora held her ground, even though every instinct screamed at her to retreat. Because we're both trapped. You're surrounded by people who want you dead or controlled. I'm a wolfless girl who'd be murdered the moment she became inconvenient. We don't have to trust each other, but we can recognize mutual survival when we see it. Ronan stared at her, shadows writhing. Then, abruptly, he stepped back. You're either very clever or very foolish. Probably both. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. Get out. Go back to your chambers. Read your books. Learn how to smile at nobles who despise you. And remember, you saw nothing. The shadows don't exist. Am I clear? Perfectly clear. She left, her hand shaking, her mind racing. She'd taken a risk being honest about the shadows, but something in her had known it was the right move. Ronan was used to fear and deception. He wasn't used to someone simply acknowledging what was real. Back in her chambers, Liora stood at the window overlooking those dead gardens. Rain poured down, pooling in the cracked fountains, running off the skeletal oak's bare branches. 4 years dead, Ronan had said, dead since his first queen. An idea took root. She pulled a shawl around her shoulders and slipped out of her chambers. The attendants called after her, but she ignored them, moving through corridors until she found a door leading to the gardens. The rain soaked her within seconds. The cold bit through her dress. But Liora barely noticed as she made her way to the nearest flower bed, dropping to her knees in the mud. The soil was dead, utterly lifeless, compacted and sour. Nothing would grow here without serious work. But Grandmara had taught her how to read soil, how to coax life from reluctant earth. She dug her fingers in, feeling for any hint of vitality. Nothing. She moved to the next bed. Same result. The fountain, choked with debris but the stone intact. The oak tree? Her breath caught. She pressed her palm against the bark and felt it. Faint, almost imperceptible, but there, a thread of life still running through the ancient tree's heart. It wasn't dead. It was dormant. Waiting. What are you doing? Liora spun. Ronan stood at the garden entrance, shadows coiling around him, his expression unreadable. Testing something, she said. In the rain, covered in mud. The day before your wedding. The tree isn't dead. The whole garden isn't dead. It's dormant. It can be brought back. He moved closer, stopping several feet away. 4 years I've watched this garden rot. 4 years of every gardener in the kingdom trying and failing to restore it. Because they don't understand what killed it in the first place. She stood, facing him. It's not disease. It's not soil exhaustion. This garden didn't die. It was drained. Something pulled the life right out of it. Ronan's expression went carefully blank. That's impossible. Is it? She gestured to the shadows around him. You carry something that shouldn't exist. Why couldn't it drain life from growing things? The shadows recoiled, pulling tight against him. For a moment, Ronan looked almost vulnerable, a flash of pain crossing his features before his mask snapped back into place. Get inside, Tees. he said roughly. "Before you catch your death. Let me try to fix it." "Why?" "Because I can. Because it's something I know how to do. And because—" She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. "Because what?" "Because if I can bring life back to a dead garden, maybe I can prove I'm not completely useless." Ronan stared at her for a long moment, rain streaming down both their faces. Then, impossibly, he nodded. "Fine. Try. But when you fail, and you will fail, don't expect sympathy." He left her standing there in the rain, shadows and all. Liora turned back to the garden, her heart pounding with something that felt almost like hope. She had 3 days until the wedding. 3 days to prove she was more than the weak pawn Ronan thought he'd chosen. 3 days to show this dead kingdom that even the powerless could create something beautiful. And maybe, just maybe, 3 days to start understanding the curse that haunted the man she was about to marry. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving the garden slick with mud and possibility. Liora returned at first light, bringing tools she'd begged from the groundskeeper, a man who'd looked at her like she'd grown a second head when she'd asked for a spade and pruning shears. "Your Majesty, the gardens have been dead for years," he'd said, his tone hovering between pity and condescension. "Every expert in the kingdom has tried." "Then one more failure won't matter much, will it?" Now she knelt beside the ancient oak, her hands already blistered from digging around its roots. The soil here was worse than she'd thought. Not just dead, but poisoned somehow, as if something had leached every trace of vitality from the earth itself. She worked methodically, removing the corrupted soil and replacing it with fresh earth mixed with ash and compost. "This is madness." Liora looked up to find Magistra Vey standing at the garden entrance, her expression caught between exasperation and concern. "Probably," Liora agreed, returning to her work. "You're to be married tomorrow. You should be preparing, not playing in the dirt like a common farmhand." "I can do both." Vey moved closer, careful to keep her fine shoes out of the mud. "Do you have any idea what the court is saying? That the wolfless queen has lost her mind before the wedding even happens, that His Majesty chose poorly, that you're proof the crown has grown weak." "Let them talk." Liora cut away a section of dead root, exposing healthier wood beneath. "Words can't hurt me. I've heard worse from better people. Words can absolutely hurt you. Words can get you killed." Vey's voice dropped to something urgent. "Lord Kyle is still here. He's meeting with the northern nobles gathering support. Every sign of weakness from you strengthens his position." "Then it's fortunate I'm exactly as weak as everyone thinks." Liora sat back on her heels, meeting Vey's eyes. "That's the point, isn't it? I'm no threat to anyone. Not to Kyle, not to the court, not even to my future husband. I'm just a wolfless girl trying to grow flowers in dead soil. Hardly the actions of a dangerous schemer." Vey studied her for a long moment. "You're either craftier than you appear or genuinely unaware of the danger you're in. Can it be both?" Something that might have been reluctant respect crossed Vey's face. "The ceremony is at noon tomorrow. Try to look presentable at least, and for heaven's sake, get those hands clean. You can't wear a wedding ring with soil under your nails." She left and Liora returned to her work. The truth was, she did understand the danger, but she also understood that appearing harmless was the best protection she had. A queen obsessed with gardening was no threat to anyone's power. A queen covered in mud and dirt was easy to dismiss, and while they dismissed her, she could learn the truth about what had killed this garden, and maybe, if she was very lucky, discover something about the curse that clung to the man she was about to marry. By midday, she'd cleared a section around the oak and planted winter herbs, hardy things that could survive cold soil and neglect. They probably wouldn't thrive, not yet, but Grandmara had always said the first step in healing land was showing it someone cared. "Talking to plants now?" Liora turned to find a young woman watching from the path, perhaps 25, beautiful in a sharp-edged way, with auburn hair and eyes like green glass. She wore a noblewoman's dress, the kind that cost more than Leora's entire wardrobe, and regarded the garden with obvious disdain. "Not talking," Liora said carefully, "just working." "How quaint." The woman moved closer, her smile cold. "You don't know who I am, do you?" "I'm afraid not, my lady." "Lady Seraphine Ashford. My family controls the eastern trade routes." She tilted her head, examining Liora like an interesting insect. I was one of the candidates, in the selection. I actually believed I had a chance. Alpha bloodline, political connections, education in strategy and statecraft. Then His Majesty chose you instead. The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut. I'm sorry, Liora said, because she genuinely was. She hadn't wanted this position. Seraphine clearly had. Are you? Seraphine laughed. Don't apologize for winning, dear. It makes you look weak. She crouched down, heedless of the mud threatening her expensive dress. Tell me something. Why do you think he chose you? Really? Because I'm no threat to him. Honest, at least. Yes, that's exactly why. You're a placeholder, a womb to carry an heir, assuming you're even capable of that, which, given your other deficiencies, seems questionable. Seraphine's smile sharpened. But here's what you need to understand. Ronan may have chosen you, but the court will never accept you. The nobles will plot against you. The servants will undermine you. And someone, probably Lord Kyle, possibly me, will eventually arrange for you to have a tragic accident. Leora's blood went cold. Is that a threat? It's a warning. I actually don't hate you, believe it or not. You seem relatively harmless, and you're clearly out of your depth. So here's some free advice. Produce an heir quickly, then retire to a country estate and live out your days in obscurity. It's the only way you survive this. And if I don't? Then you'll end up like Queen Marianne, dead in your chambers with no marks on your body and no explanation beyond the king's curse claimed another victim. Seraphine stood, brushing phantom dirt from her dress. Think about it. You have until tomorrow to change your mind. After the wedding, there's no escape. She walked away, leaving Liora alone with her half-planted herbs and the weight of absolute certainty that she was heading toward her own execution. That night, Liora couldn't sleep. She lay in her enormous bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Seraphine's words. The previous queens had died. Not one, not two, but 3 women, all found dead with no explanation. And tomorrow she would join their ranks, married to a cursed king who couldn't be touched, ruling over a court that wanted her gone. She should run, flee into the night and disappear into the frontier. But where would she go? Thornpeak wouldn't take her back. She had no money, no allies, no wolf to protect her in the wild. And besides, she'd accepted this bargain. Ronan had been honest about what he wanted from her. Walking away now felt like cowardice. No, she would go through with the wedding. She would survive as long as possible. And she would learn the truth about the shadows that followed her future husband, because understanding them felt like the key to everything. Dawn came too quickly. Attendants swarmed her chambers, pulling her into elaborate preparations. The bathing, the hair arranging, the careful application of cosmetics that made her look almost beautiful. Then the dress, white silk embroidered with silver thread, far too fine for someone like her. It hung perfectly despite being made in just 2 days, as if the seamstresses had known exactly what she would look like. You look like a queen, one attendant murmured, sounding surprised. Liora stared at her reflection. The woman looking back was a stranger, elegant, refined, transformed by expensive fabric and skilled hands. But underneath, she was still just Liora Vance, still wolfless, still powerless, still terrified. Magistra Vey appeared, her expression unreadable. It's time. The ceremony would take place in the throne room before the assembled court. Liora walked through corridors lined with guards, her heart hammering with each step. Through tall windows she glimpsed her garden, the herbs she'd planted already wilting in the cold, a fitting metaphor. The throne room doors opened and sound washed over her, hundreds of voices, all falling silent as she entered. The space was packed with nobles, their faces ranging from curious to contemptuous. At the far end, on the dais beside the throne, stood Ronan. He wore black leather and silver chains, his expression carved from ice. The shadows pooled around him, thicker than she'd ever seen them, as if they fed on the crowd's fear and suspicion. His eyes found hers across the distance, and something passed between them, not warmth, but acknowledgement. They were both walking into a trap, and they both knew it. Liora moved down the aisle, forcing herself not to stumble. Faces blurred past, Lord Kale watching with calculating interest, Lady Seraphine with that cold smile, dozens of nobles she'd never met, and who would never accept her. She reached the dais and climbed the steps. Up close, Ronan looked even more dangerous, all hard edges and barely leashed violence. but his voice, when he spoke, was steady. "Are you ready?" "No," she whispered back. "But when has that ever mattered?" His mouth twitched, almost a smile. The ceremony began. A priest in ceremonial robes spoke words about unity and strength, about the sacred bond between alpha and mate. Liora barely heard them. She was too focused on staying upright, on not showing the terror threatening to overwhelm her. "The vows," the priest intoned. Ronan turned to face her fully, his eyes locking onto hers with predatory intensity. "I, Ronan Drax, Alpha, King of the Realm, take you, Liora Vance, as my mate and queen. I bind myself to you before these witnesses to protect and provide for you as long as we both shall live." The words felt like a cage closing. Liora forced her voice to work. "I, Liora Vance, take you, Ronan Drax, as my mate and king. I bind myself to you before these witnesses to stand at your side and honor our bond as long as we both shall live." The rings. An attendant stepped forward with a velvet cushion bearing 2 silver bands. Ronan took one, and for a moment Liora thought he would put it on her finger himself, which would require touching her. Instead, he held it out. "Take it," he said quietly. She did, sliding the ring onto her own finger. It was cold, heavy, inscribed with symbols she didn't recognize. Then she took the other ring and held it out for him. He took it without their fingers touching, a careful dance of avoidance, and put it on himself. "By the power vested in me by the crown and the realm," the priest declared, "I pronounce you bound as mates, united as king and queen. May your bond bring strength to the kingdom." It was done. She was queen. The throne room erupted in applause, polite, measured, absolutely devoid of genuine celebration. Ronan took her hand, or rather, he gestured for her to place her hand near his, maintaining a careful inch of distance, and led her back down the aisle. The crowd parted before them, and Liora felt the weight of their stares like physical blows. The feast that followed was excruciating. Seated beside Ronan at the high table, maintaining that careful distance, Liora endured hours of nobles approaching to offer congratulations that dripped with insincerity. Lord Kael made a show of toasting the new queen, his words perfectly courteous and absolutely mocking. "To Queen Liora," he declared, raising his glass, "may she bring fresh perspective to the crown, and may that perspective include knowing when to stay out of matters beyond her understanding." Laughter rippled through the hall. Ronan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Couldn't say anything, Liora realized, without confirming that his choice of bride had been a political disaster. She was expected to respond, expected to say something gracious and self-deprecating that would diffuse the tension. Instead, she found herself standing, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent hall. "Thank you, Lord Kael, for your generous wishes. I'm well aware of my limitations, but I've learned something growing up on the frontier. Sometimes the weakest-looking things are the ones that survive when everything else dies. Winter kills the strong trees that won't bend. It spares the flexible ones that know how to adapt." She sat down, her heart pounding. Around the hall, nobles exchanged glances. Ronan's expression remained carefully neutral, but she caught the briefest flash of approval in his eyes. Kael's smile hardened. "Wise words, Your Majesty. I hope you remember them when winter comes." The feast dragged on. Finally, mercifully, it ended. Ronan stood, and the hall fell silent again. "My queen and I retire for the evening. The celebrations will continue tomorrow." They left together, that careful distance maintained, walking through corridors toward the royal chambers. Leora's stomach knotted with dread. The wedding night. She had no idea how that was supposed to work when the groom couldn't be touched. Ronan must have sensed her tension. "Relax. I'm not going to force myself on you." "I didn't think—" "Yes, you did. Everyone does." He stopped at a door, not the queen's chambers where she'd been staying, but somewhere else. "These are the king's rooms. You'll sleep there." He pointed to an adjacent door. "I'll be here. There's a connecting passage, but it stays locked unless I summon you." "And the heir everyone expects?" His expression went cold. "We'll address that when necessary. For now, maintaining appearances is enough." He turned to leave, then paused. "You did well tonight, standing up to Kael. Most people are too frightened of him to show any spine." "I was terrified. I know. That's what made it brave. He disappeared into his chambers, the door closing with finality. Liora stood alone in the corridor, processing the fact that her wedding night would be spent in solitude. She entered her new rooms, larger than before, more opulent, utterly impersonal. A fire burned in the hearth, candles provided soft light, and on the bed lay a nightgown of white silk, laid out by invisible servants. Liora changed mechanically, her mind still churning. She was queen now, bound to a cursed king, hated by the court, targeted by ambitious nobles who saw her as an obstacle to be removed. And somewhere in this fortress, answers waited about what had really happened to the previous queens. She moved to the window. Her garden was visible below, the herbs she'd planted barely clinging to life in the dead soil. Tomorrow, she would return to that work. Tomorrow, she would begin the slow process of coaxing life back into poisoned ground. Tonight, she just needed to survive. She was reaching to close the curtains when she saw them, shadows moving in the garden. Not Ronan's shadows, these were different. Figures in dark clothes, moving with purpose toward the ancient oak. 3 of them, carrying something that glinted in the moonlight. Shovels. Liora's breath caught. They were digging. In her garden. In the middle of the night, on her wedding night, someone was excavating the ground around the oak tree. She should alert the guards. Should wake Ronan. Should do anything except what she actually did, which was grab a shawl, slip out of her chambers, and head toward the garden alone. The corridors were empty, the guards stationed at their posts and paying no attention to a queen in a nightgown. Liora made it to the garden entrance and paused, listening. Voices carried on the cold air, low, urgent, male. Deeper, it should be deeper. Are you certain it's here? The old queen said so before she died, buried at the oak's roots. Protection against the curse, she claimed. Liora's blood turned to ice. They were talking about Marianne, the first queen, and they were digging for something she'd hidden. She crept closer, using the skeletal bushes for cover. The men had their backs to her, focused on their excavation. They dug a hole 3 feet deep beside the oak, right where she'd planted her herbs. Found something! One of them reached down, pulling out a wrapped bundle. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing... Liora couldn't see clearly from her position. She edged closer, and a twig snapped under her foot. All 3 men spun toward her. Who's there? Liora froze. In the moonlight, she recognized the man holding the bundle, Captain Roth, one of Ronan's own guards. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. Your Majesty. Roth's voice was cold. You should be in your chambers. What are you doing? She tried to keep her voice steady. What did you find? Nothing that concerns you. He gestured to the others. Take her. They moved fast, but Liora was faster. She ran, her bare feet slipping on wet grass, heading for the castle. If she could just reach the guards, reach Ronan. A hand caught her arm. She screamed, and immediately another hand clamped over her mouth. They dragged her back toward the garden, toward the shadows beneath the oak. Quiet, Roth hissed in her ear, or this ends badly for everyone. Liora bit his hand. He cursed and released her mouth. She screamed again, as loud as she could. Ronan! Roth backhanded her. Stars exploded across her vision. She fell to the ground, tasting blood. Stupid girl, did you really think the king would come for you? You're nothing, a placeholder. He doesn't... Shadows erupted from the castle. They came like a tidal wave of darkness, pouring through windows and doors, racing across the garden with terrifying speed. Liora scrambled backward as they washed over the 3 men, who screamed in terror. And through the shadows came Ronan. He wore only sleep pants, his chest bare, his expression absolutely murderous. The shadows answered to him like extensions of his body, wrapping around the 3 men and lifting them off the ground. Who sent you? His voice was barely human. Roth struggled against the shadow bindings. No one sent us. We came for the artifact. Liar! Ronan's roar shook the garden. The shadows tightened and Roth screamed in pain. Who sent you? Lord Kael, one of the other men broke. Lord Kael said the first queen hid something here. Something that could control the curse. He paid us to retrieve it. Ronan went absolutely still. Then his eyes found Liora, still on the ground, blood running from her split lip. Did they hurt you? She nodded, not trusting her voice. The shadows exploded outward. The 3 men screamed as darkness consumed them, not killing, she realized, but causing unimaginable pain. They writhed and begged and finally fell silent, unconscious. Then Ronan turned to her, and she saw the truth of what he was. The shadows weren't just attached to him, they were part of him. They flowed from his skin like smoke, responding to his emotions, manifesting his rage as physical force. This wasn't a curse inflicted from outside. This was power, twisted and dark, bound to his very soul. "Get up," he said, his voice rough. Liora stood on shaking legs. Ronan moved toward her, and for the first time she saw real fear in his eyes. Not of the traitors, but of himself. The shadows followed him, reaching toward her, and he stopped several feet away. "Don't come closer," he warned. "I can't control them when I'm angry. If they touch you—" "What did the first queen hide?" Liora interrupted. "What were they looking for?" Ronan's expression twisted. Something that should have stayed buried. He gestured, and the shadows deposited the wrapped bundle at his feet. He stared at it like it might explode. "Marianne died trying to control this curse. She thought she could fix me, make me normal." His laugh was bitter. "She was wrong." "What happened to her?" "The shadows killed her." His voice went flat. "She touched me. I warned her not to, but she didn't believe me. Thought love was stronger than curses. The shadows wrapped around her before I could stop them, and they drained her life in seconds. Just like they drained this garden. Just like they'll drain anything living that makes contact with me." The truth crashed over Liora. The garden hadn't died because of disease or neglect. It had died because the queen had died here, and the shadows had consumed everything nearby, leeching life from the soil itself. "The other queens," she whispered, "learned from Marianne's mistake, kept their distance. But the curse found other ways." He looked haunted. "It feeds on proximity. The longer someone stays close to me, the more the shadows hunger for them. Second queen lasted a year before the shadows found her in her sleep. Third queen barely made it 6 months. And you chose me knowing I would die the same way." "Yes." No apology, no shame, just brutal honesty. "I chose you because you were expendable, because no one would miss a wolfless girl from the frontier, because I needed an heir before the curse takes me completely, and you were weak enough not to resist." Liora should have been angry, should have felt betrayed. Instead, she felt something else entirely, a strange, crystalline clarity. "Show me," she said. "What?" "The shadows. Show me what they really are." "Are you insane? They'll kill you." "Maybe." She moved toward him, and he backed away. "Or maybe I'm the one person in this kingdom who isn't afraid enough of you to run. Maybe that's why you really chose me, not because I'm weak, but because I'm the only one willing to look directly at what you've become." Liora, stop. "No." She kept advancing, and he kept retreating until his back hit the oak tree. "You've been alone with this curse for years. Everyone maintains distance. Everyone fears you. Everyone sees you as a monster. But I see something else." "What do you see?" His voice was raw. "Someone who's drowning and convinced he deserves it." The shadows surged. They rushed toward her like a living wave, and Liora did the most reckless thing she'd ever done in her life. She didn't run. She stood her ground, raised her hands, and let the shadows touch her. Cold crashed through her system. Not painful exactly, but overwhelming, like being plunged into ice water, like drowning in darkness. The shadows wrapped around her arms, her shoulders, testing, tasting, hungry for the life force they'd been denied for so long. "Liora, no!" Ronan's scream was anguished, but something strange was happening. The shadows were cold, yes, but they weren't draining her. They were confused, searching for something they expected to find and couldn't. They wound around her like curious serpents, touching her face, her hair, finding nothing to feed on, because she had no wolf. The realization hit them both simultaneously. Liora had no inner beast, no primal energy, no wolf consciousness the shadows could consume. She was human, just human, and the curse that fed on shifter vitality found nothing in her to drain. The shadows retreated, swirling back to Ronan, and for the first time in years he looked at another person without fear. "You're immune," he breathed. "You can't be drained because there's nothing for them to take." Liora stared at her hands, still intact, still alive. "That's why the previous queens died. They all had wolves. The shadows consumed their shifter energy." "But you don't have a wolf." Wonder crept into his voice. You never had a wolf. Was They stood there in the ruined garden, surrounded by unconscious traitors and the evidence of Lord Kael's betrayal, and between them passed an understanding that changed everything. Ronan hadn't chosen wrong. He'd chosen the only person in the entire kingdom who could survive being close to him. And Liora, the girl everyone had called broken, had just discovered that her greatest weakness was actually the key to surviving an impossible curse. Ronan stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. The shadows still coiled around him, but they'd pulled back from Liora completely, retreating like chastised dogs who'd been caught doing something wrong. All this time, he said slowly, I thought my curse made me untouchable. But it was never about me being cursed. It was about everyone else having something to lose. Except me. Leora's voice was steadier than she felt. I've never had anything to lose. Guards poured into the garden then, drawn by the commotion. They stopped short at the sight of their king standing shirtless beside his new queen, 3 unconscious traitors at their feet, and shadows writhing through the air like living smoke. Your Majesty! The guard captain, a different one than the traitor Roth, approached cautiously. We heard screaming. Captain Roth and his men attacked the queen, Ronan said, his voice carrying absolute authority. They were acting on Lord Kael's orders, searching for an artifact the first queen hid. Take them to the dungeons. I'll deal with them personally. The guards moved to obey, hauling the 3 unconscious men away. One of them picked up the wrapped bundle, but Ronan's voice cracked like a whip. Leave that! The guard dropped it immediately and retreated. When they were alone again, Ronan turned back to Liora. You're bleeding. She touched her split lip, feeling the dried blood. It's nothing. It's not nothing. He struck you. The shadows darkened, responding to his anger. He struck my queen on our wedding night in my garden while stealing from my dead wife's grave. His eyes met hers, and she saw something dangerous there. That demands a response. Tomorrow, Liora said. Deal with them tomorrow. Right now we need to see what they were digging for. Ronan hesitated, then nodded. He crouched beside the bundle, unwrapping it carefully. Inside was a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age but still intact. He opened it, and Liora moved closer to read over his shoulder. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, marked with dates from 4 years ago. The curse is not what everyone believes. I've studied it for months now, watching how the shadows respond, when they grow stronger, when they recede. They're not mindless, they're protective. Ronan thinks they're trying to consume him, but I believe they're trying to shield him from something far worse. Marianne wrote this, Ronan said, his voice rough. I didn't know she kept a journal. They read on, page after page of careful observations. Marianne had been documenting the shadows' behavior, noting patterns, trying to understand what had created them in the first place. The court believes the curse appeared during Ronan's ascension ceremony, but they're wrong. I've questioned servants who were there. The shadows first appeared when he was 13, the night his mother tried to poison him. She'd put something in his wine, something meant to weaken him enough for her to claim the throne through regency. But his wolf sensed the danger and manifested early, ahead of schedule, wild with protective instinct. The shadows came with it, not as a curse, but as a defense mechanism gone wrong. Liora looked up at Ronan. His face had gone pale, carved from stone. You didn't know, she said. I knew she tried to kill me. I didn't know. He trailed off, staring at the journal as if it might bite him. I thought the shadows were punishment, for surviving when I should have died, for taking the throne when she wanted it. The shadows feed on shifter energy because that's what they were designed to do, drain threats before they can harm him. But they can't distinguish between enemy and ally. They only know shifter near Ronan equals potential danger. That's why his queens keep dying. The shadows see their wolves as threats and act accordingly. But I have no wolf, Liora whispered, so they don't see me as a threat. Ronan turned pages until he reached the final entry, dated the day Marianne died. I found a way to suppress the shadows temporarily. If I can get close enough to touch him, channel calming energy through physical contact, the shadows should stabilize long enough for him to learn control. It's dangerous. The shadows will resist, but if I can prove to him that he's not a monster, that this curse can be managed, maybe he'll stop isolating himself. Maybe we can actually be married instead of just legally bound. I'm going to try tonight. If this works, we might actually have a future together. The entry ended there. Liora could imagine what happened next. Marianne approaching Ronan with good intentions, the shadows perceiving her wolf as a threat, the violent response before anyone could stop it. "She died trying to save you," Liora said quietly. "She died because I'm cursed." Ronan closed the journal with careful precision. "And now Kael knows about this. Knows that my first queen believed the shadows could be controlled. He'll use that information, twist it somehow. How? I don't know, but Kael doesn't make moves without strategy." He stood, offering Liora his hand, then stopped, remembering. Even knowing she was immune, years of habit held him back. Liora reached out and took his hand. The contact was electric, not painful, not dangerous, just warm human touch, the first he'd felt in years. His fingers closed around hers, tentative, as if he expected her to disappear. "This is real," she said. "I can touch you. You can touch me. Whatever else the curse has taken, it can't take this." Ronan pulled her closer, slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. When she didn't, he raised his free hand to her face, his thumb brushing the cut on her lip with unexpected gentleness. "I chose you because I thought you were expendable," he said. "I need you to know that. I looked at you and saw someone the kingdom wouldn't miss." "I know. But I was wrong. Not about you being what I needed, about why you were what I needed." His eyes searched hers. "You're not surviving this curse by accident, Liora. You're the only person in this entire realm who could survive it. That's not weakness. That's the opposite." Before she could respond, he kissed her. It was careful, controlled, as if he were afraid he might hurt her even now. But it was also real. The first genuine intimacy he'd known in years, and Liora found herself responding, her hands moving to his bare shoulders, feeling the warmth of his skin and the way the shadows retreated further, giving them space. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ronan's expression had shifted. Not to warmth, he wasn't capable of that, but to something like partnership, recognition. "We need to move against Kael," he said, "before he moves against us." "What did you have in mind?" "Publicly, nothing. We can't prove he sent Roth without interrogation, and if I torture my own guards for information, it makes me look tyrannical." He began pacing, the shadows moving with him. "But privately, we can start dismantling his support. The Northern Lords follow him because they believe he's strong and I'm weak. If we can prove otherwise, we need to show them you're in control," Liora finished, "not controlled by the curse." "Exactly. Which means I need to appear in public. Really appear, not just show up and leave. Interact with the court, prove I'm not a monster hiding in shadows." "With me beside you." "With you beside me," he agreed. "The queen who can stand next to the cursed king without dying. It changes the narrative." Liora understood what he wasn't saying. She was proof that he could be approached, touched, even, potentially, loved. That made her dangerous in an entirely different way than he'd anticipated. "Kael will try to kill me," she said. "Yes." "Soon, probably." "Yes." "Good." She squared her shoulders. "Let him try. I've survived worse than ambitious nobles." Ronan's smile was sharp as broken glass. "You're either very brave or completely insane." "I keep telling people, both." They returned to the castle together, Ronan's hand warm in hers, a simple gesture that would have been impossible yesterday. The guards they passed stared openly at the sight of their king making physical contact with another person. By morning, the whole castle would know. That was the point. Dawn came with a summons. Lord Kael requested immediate audience to discuss matters of urgent concern to the realm. Ronan received the message while breaking fast in the queen's chambers. Another impossible thing, the king actually sharing a meal with his wife. "He knows something happened last night," Ronan said, studying the letter. "But he can't know what exactly, or he wouldn't be requesting audience. He'd be mobilizing his forces." "So we tell him nothing?" "We tell him his men tried to rob the royal gardens and were caught in the act. We don't mention the journal, the shadows, or your immunity. Let him wonder." They met Kael in the throne room, deliberately formal. Ronan sat the throne while Liora stood at his side. Not behind, not separate, but beside. Close enough that everyone could see. Close enough that the shadows coiled around them both without causing harm. The court noticed. Whispers rippled through the assembled nobles. Kale entered with his usual confidence, but Liora saw the moment he registered the changed dynamic. His eyes narrowed slightly, calculation flickering across his handsome features. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty." He bowed to each of them. "I've heard disturbing rumors about events last night." "Have you?" Ronan's voice was mild. "Something about Captain Roth being arrested. On what charges, I wonder?" "Attempted theft, assault on the Queen, conspiracy." Ronan leaned back in the throne. "Would you like the full list? I can have it drawn up." "That seems excessive. Roth is a loyal soldier. Roth is a traitor who attacked my wife on our wedding night." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "He's been interrogated, very thoroughly. He had interesting things to say about who paid him to dig in the royal gardens." Kale's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or anger. I'm sure whatever story he told under duress was corroborated by his accomplices. All three told the same tale. Ronan stood, descending from the dais with the shadows flowing around him like a cloak. "You hired them to steal from a dead queen's grave, Kyle. That's treason. I could have your head for it. If you could prove it, you already would have." Kale's smile was cold. "But you can't. It's the word of 3 desperate men against mine, and I have the northern lords behind me. Do you really want to start a civil war over unprovable accusations?" The throne room went dead silent. This was the moment, the naked threat, delivered in front of witnesses. Kyle was daring Ronan to act, knowing the king couldn't afford open conflict. Liora felt Ronan's tension beside her. He was trapped. Move against Kyle and risk fracturing the kingdom. Ignore Kale's treason and appear weak. Either choice led to disaster, unless there was a third option. "You're right," Liora said, her voice carrying across the silent hall. 3 desperate men's word against yours. But what if there were another witness? Someone whose word you couldn't dispute? Kyle turned to her, his expression amused. "And who might that be, Your Majesty? You?" "Yes." The amusement vanished. "You weren't there when I allegedly gave them orders." "No. But I was there when they dug up what you sent them for." She descended the dais, moving to stand between Ronan and Kale. "I saw them excavate the journal. I heard them say your name, and unlike 3 guards facing execution, I have no reason to lie." "You have every reason to lie. You're the queen. You'll say whatever supports your husband's position." "Will I?" Liora tilted her head. "Then explain why I'm publicly announcing that I interrupted a robbery attempt alone, in the dark, on my wedding night, instead of staying safely in my chambers like a proper queen should. That makes me look either reckless or foolish. Why would I claim that if it weren't true?" The logic was sound, and Kyle knew it. His jaw tightened. "Furthermore," Liora continued, "you're welcome to question me before any witnesses you choose. I'll tell the same story, because it's what actually happened. Will you do the same? Will you swear before this court that you never hired those men, never sought Marianne's journal, never plotted against the crown?" The trap was perfect. If Kale swore his innocence and was later proven wrong, he'd be condemned by his own words. If he refused to swear, he'd appear guilty. And if he claimed a queen's word meant nothing, he'd insult the crown directly, giving Ronan justification for action. Kale's eyes narrowed. "Your Majesty," he said, addressing Liora with acid courtesy, "you seem remarkably well informed for someone who arrived at court less than a week ago." "I pay attention." "So I see." He turned back to Ronan. "Very well. I acknowledge that my name may have been mentioned by men seeking to implicate me in their crime, but I maintain my innocence. If you wish to pursue formal charges, I'll answer them before the full council." "I'm sure you will." Ronan's smile was dangerous. "But first, there's another matter to address. My wife was struck last night, in my garden, under my protection. That's not just treason, it's a personal insult. And that requires personal satisfaction." The court stirred. Personal satisfaction meant only one thing, a challenge. "You want to duel me?" Kyle laughed. "Over a slap delivered by a subordinate?" "No, I want you to apologize to my queen, publicly, right now." The demand was calculated. If Kale apologized, he'd appear weak before the entire court. If he refused, he'd confirm his disrespect for the crown. Either way, Ronan won. Kael's expression went cold. I had nothing to do with... Then apologizing cost you nothing. Ronan's voice cut like a blade. Unless, of course, you believe your pride is worth more than your loyalty to the throne. The silence stretched. Every noble in the room watched, waiting to see which way Kael would break. Finally, he turned to Liora, his eyes promising future retribution. Your Majesty, I apologize for any distress caused by last night's events. I hope you recover swiftly. It was perfectly phrased, expressing regret without admitting guilt. But it was still an apology, delivered before witnesses, and that shifted the power dynamic just slightly. Thank you, Lord Kael, Liora said, her voice gracious. Your concern is noted. Kael bowed stiffly and withdrew. As he left the throne room, Liora could see the calculation in his eyes. This wasn't over. It was barely begun. But for the first time, he was treating her as an actual player in the game rather than a piece to be removed. When the court dispersed, Ronan pulled her aside into a private corridor. That was dangerous, he said. It worked. This time. But you painted a target on yourself. Kael won't forget that you publicly backed me against him. Good. Let him remember. Let everyone remember. Liora met his eyes. You needed someone who would stand beside you without flinching. That's what I just did. That's what I'll keep doing, because someone has to prove that the cursed king isn't cursed. He's just alone. Ronan stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, the shadows settling into stillness. It was the first real embrace he'd given another person in years. I chose wrong, he said into her hair. What? I chose you thinking you were weak, but you're not. You're fierce, and that changes everything. Over the next week, everything did change. Liora began appearing at Ronan's side for every public function, council meetings, court sessions, formal dinners. At first, the nobles watched with barely concealed skepticism, waiting for her to die like the other queens. But days passed, then a week, and the wolfless queen remained alive, healthy, often touching the king in ways that should have been impossible. The whispers started shifting. Maybe the curse was weakening. Maybe the new queen had some kind of protection. Maybe the king wasn't as dangerous as everyone believed. Liora encouraged the speculation by working openly in the garden. She'd moved past the oak tree now, expanding her restoration efforts across the entire space. Servants watched her dig in the dirt, plant new seeds, coax life back into poisoned soil. It was slow work. The corruption ran deep. But she was making progress. And as the garden began to heal, so did the king's reputation. You're using the garden as metaphor, Magistrave observed one afternoon, watching Liora work. Life returning to dead ground, hope growing in cursed soil. I'm just planting flowers. You're doing politics. Vay's smile was slight, and you're better at it than you pretend. The court sees you bring life to places of death. They're starting to believe you might be able to do the same for their cursed king. Can I? I don't know, but the fact that they're asking the question means you've already changed the game. That night, Liora worked late in the garden, planting winter roses around the fountain. She was so focused she didn't hear approaching footsteps until a voice spoke from the shadows. Impressive progress, Your Majesty. She spun to find Lady Seraphine watching from the path, her expression unreadable. Lady Seraphine, it's late. Yes, I wanted to speak privately. Seraphine moved closer, her earlier hostility replaced by something more complex. I owe you an apology. I predicted you'd be dead within a month. Instead, you've become the most interesting person at court. I'm not sure that's a compliment. It's not. It's an observation. Seraphine studied her. You really are immune to the shadows, aren't you? It's not a trick or protection spell. I'm wolfless. There's nothing for them to drain. And that never occurred to anyone in 4 years of dead queens. We were all so focused on strength and power, we missed the obvious solution. Seraphine laughed bitterly. Ronan's not weak, he's brilliant. He found the one woman in the kingdom who could actually survive being his mate. He didn't know when he chose me. He thought I was expendable. But you're not. You're essential, and that's why Kael is planning something. Seraphine's voice dropped. I don't know what, but I've seen him meeting with certain nobles, the kind who remember when the Theron line held power. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm reconsidering my loyalties. Kael promised me position and influence if he took the throne, but I'm starting to think the king, your husband, might actually have a chance of surviving this. And backing the winning side is always good strategy. Liora studied her carefully. What do you want in return for this information? A place in your inner circle, or at least the promise that when you consolidate power, you'll remember who warned you. Seraphine smiled. I'm ambitious, Your Majesty. I don't pretend otherwise, but I'm also practical. And right now practicality says betting on you is the smarter move. I'll consider it. Do that. Seraphine turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. The garden looks beautiful, the roses especially. They're starting to bloom despite the cold. Liora looked down at the winter roses she'd planted. Seraphine was right. Tiny buds were forming, impossibly early, as if the plants were responding to something beyond seasonal timing. She stayed in the garden after Seraphine left, watching those fragile buds and thinking about growth in impossible circumstances, about things that bloomed when they should have withered, about strength that looked like weakness until you examined it closely. 2 weeks into the marriage, Ronan summoned the full court for an announcement. Liora stood beside him on the dais, her hand in his, while the assembled nobles watched with varying degrees of curiosity and concern. There has been much speculation, Ronan said, his voice carrying absolute authority, about my marriage to Queen Liora, about whether she would survive, about whether the curse would claim her as it did my previous queens. He paused. I'm here to end that speculation. The curse no longer threatens my queen. She is immune to the shadows that have plagued my reign, and through her immunity I have learned something crucial. The shadows are not a curse to be endured. They are power to be controlled. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ronan raised his free hand and the shadows responded, coiling around his arm like trained serpents. They moved with precision now, purpose, nothing wild or chaotic in their behavior. I have been controlled by fear for 4 years, Ronan continued. Fear of hurting those close to me. Fear of the power I carried. But my queen has shown me that fear is a choice, and I'm done choosing it. The shadows expanded, filling the throne room with darkness. But it was controlled darkness, shaped and directed. It formed patterns in the air, images and symbols, demonstrating absolute mastery. Then at Ronan's gesture, they retreated back to their master. The court stood in stunned silence. Lord Kyle was the first to break it. Impressive, Your Majesty, but control demonstrated in safety is different from control under pressure. How do we know the shadows won't slip your grasp when you're angry, or threatened, or, you want a test? Ronan's smile was sharp. Come closer, Kael, strike me. Let's see what happens. The challenge hung in the air. Kael couldn't refuse without looking like a coward, but accepting meant confronting the shadows directly. He climbed the dais slowly, every eye tracking his movement. When he reached Ronan, he raised his hand as if to strike, then stopped, his fist frozen in the air. The shadows had wrapped around his wrist, holding him in place with gentle but unbreakable strength. See? Ronan said mildly. Perfect control. They respond to my will, not my emotions. They protect when I command protection. They release when I command release. He gestured and the shadows let Kael go. The Lord stumbled back, his expression caught between fury and fear. My point is made, Ronan said to the court. The curse is broken, not eliminated, but mastered, and this changes everything. Liora watched the assembled nobles process this new reality. A king with shadows he couldn't control was a liability, a monster waiting to explode. But a king who commanded darkness as a weapon? That was something else entirely. That was power the kingdom could use. The shift in the room was palpable. Not acceptance, not yet, but the beginning of respect. The beginning of understanding that their cursed king might actually be their strongest asset. After the demonstration, as the court dispersed in animated discussion, Ronan pulled Liora aside. That bought us time, he said. But Kael won't accept this. He's too invested in the narrative of me being unstable. So what do? We prepare for whatever he's planning, because he's going to move soon. He has to, before my control becomes too established to question. Liora nodded, understanding the stakes. They'd won a battle today. They'd shifted perceptions, demonstrated strength, proven that the curse could be mastered. But the war was just beginning. And somewhere in the castle, Lord Kael was planning his next move. one that would either secure his claim to power or destroy him trying. Kael moved 3 days later, during the Spring Ascension Ceremony, the annual celebration where the kingdom honored its founding and renewed oaths of loyalty to the crown. The throne room was packed with nobles from every corner of the realm, all gathered to witness the traditional pledges. Liora stood beside Ronan on the dais, wearing a crown of silver that felt too heavy for her head. She'd been queen for 3 weeks now, long enough to learn the court's rhythms, but not long enough to feel comfortable. The stares still bothered her, some curious, others hostile, all evaluating whether the wolfless queen would survive another day. The ceremony progressed according to ancient protocol. One by one, noble houses approached the throne to renew their pledges. The Ashfords, the Morvaines, dozens of lesser families. Each one knelt, spoke the ritual words, and retreated. Then Lord Kael stepped forward. He wore ceremonial armor, polished to mirror brightness, his sword belted at his side. Behind him stood 20 northern lords, all armed, all wearing expressions of grim purpose. "Your Majesty," Kael said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "I come not to renew my pledge, but to question the legitimacy of this crown." Gasps rippled through the assembled nobles. Magistra Vey moved closer to the dais, her hand on her concealed weapon. Guards tensed, ready for violence. Ronan's expression remained carved from ice. "That's treason, Kael. Choose your next words carefully." "I choose them with the kingdom's future in mind." Kael turned to address the crowd. "For 4 years we've endured a cursed king, 3 queens dead, a ruler who couldn't be touched without risking death. And we accepted it because we had no alternative." He paused. "But now we do." "You mean yourself," Ronan said flatly. "I mean stability. A king whose power doesn't come from shadows and death. A ruler the people can trust to protect them instead of threatening them." Kael's hand moved to his sword hilt. "Recent demonstrations notwithstanding, you remain cursed, and a cursed king cannot secure the realm's future." "The shadows are controlled," Liora said, her voice clear despite her racing heart. "You witnessed it yourself." "I witnessed a performance, Your Majesty. But control under ideal circumstances proves nothing. What happens when the king faces real threat? When his emotions run high? Will the shadows obey then, or will they consume everything nearby?" It was a clever argument, Liora realized. Kael wasn't denying Ronan's demonstration. He was questioning whether it would hold under pressure, and that was harder to disprove without an actual crisis. "You want a test?" Ronan descended from the dais, shadows coiling around him like armor. "Fine. Attack me. You and all 20 of your northern lords. Let's see if my control breaks." "That proves nothing. I'm not your enemy. I'm your subject trying to protect this realm." Kael's smile sharpened. "But there is another test. One that would prove your control beyond question. Name it." "Produce an heir." The words dropped like stones into still water. Ronan went absolutely still. 4 years, 3 dead queens, and no children, Kael continued. "Everyone knows why. The curse makes intimacy impossible. The shadows drain life from anyone close enough to conceive. That's why the succession remains unsecured. That's why this kingdom teeters on the edge of chaos." He gestured to Liora. "Your current queen may be immune to death by shadow, but that doesn't mean she can bear your children. The curse might prevent conception entirely, and without an heir, what future does this crown have?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. This was the vulnerability Kael had been probing for, not the shadows themselves, but their consequences. A king without an heir was a king without legitimacy. "You're suggesting what, exactly?" Ronan's voice was dangerous quiet. "That you step aside. Let someone who can actually secure the succession take the throne. I would treat you well. Estate in the north, comfortable exile, all the isolation you seem to prefer." Kael spread his hands. "Or you can try to prove me wrong. But we both know you can't. The curse has taken that from you too." Liora felt Ronan's tension like a physical force. Kael had cornered him perfectly. Claiming he could produce an heir was meaningless without time to prove it, and Kael clearly wasn't planning to give him that time. The northern lords behind him shifted, hands on weapons, ready to enforce whatever decision came next. This was the move Seraphine had warned about. The carefully planned challenge that couldn't be answered with force or demonstrations of power. Either Ronan stepped aside peacefully, or the kingdom descended into civil war. Unless there was something Kael didn't know. "You're right," Liora said, stepping forward before she could second-guess herself. "The curse has prevented conception. For 4 years, King Ronan has been unable to father children because the shadows drained life from anyone close enough to try." Kael's expression turned triumphant. "Then you concede." "I concede nothing, because the situation has changed." She moved to stand beside Ronan, taking his hand. "I'm carrying the king's child." The throne room exploded into chaos. Nobles shouted questions. Guards looked to their commanders for orders. Kael's triumphant expression collapsed into shock and rage, and Ronan turned to stare at her with absolute incomprehension. "What?" he started. Liora squeezed his hand, praying he'd understand. 3 weeks we've been married. 3 weeks I've been immune to the shadows. 3 weeks of intimacy impossible for your previous queens." She addressed the court, her voice steady, despite her terror. "I suspected a week ago. I confirmed it yesterday with the royal physicians. The heir you claim is impossible will be born before winter." It was a lie. A complete, desperate fabrication built on nothing but necessity. But it was also the only move that could counter Kael's challenge. An announced pregnancy secured the succession, proved Ronan's capability, and destroyed Kael's justification for rebellion, all in one devastating strike. The question was whether anyone would believe it. Magistra Vey recovered first. "Is this true? The physicians confirmed it?" "They did." Another lie layered on the first. "We kept it quiet until I was certain. Given the history of dead queens, we didn't want to announce prematurely." "Convenient timing," Kael said, his voice tight with fury. "The moment I question the succession, suddenly there's an heir on the way." "Yes, Lord Kael, almost as if we anticipated your challenge and prepared accordingly." Ronan had recovered from his shock, his expression shifting to cold calculation. He understood what Liora had done, bought them time, turned Kael's attack back on itself. "Did you really think we wouldn't see this coming? That we'd walk into your trap unprepared?" The bluff was working. Liora could see nobles reconsidering, questioning whether Kael had underestimated the crown's strategic thinking. A few were even nodding, as if, of course, the king would have contingencies planned. "Prove it," Kael demanded. "Summon the physicians, have them testify." "Well, I don't answer to your demands," Ronan said coldly. "But if the court requires verification, the physicians can present their findings at tomorrow's council session. In the meantime, you and your northern lords will surrender your weapons and submit to crown authority. Your challenge has failed, Kael. Accept it gracefully or face consequences." For a moment, it balanced on a knife's edge. Kael's hand tightened on his sword. His men shifted, ready to draw. One wrong move, and the throne room would become a bloodbath. Then Lady Seraphine stepped forward from the crowd. "I can confirm the queen's condition," she said smoothly. "I've noticed the signs. The morning sickness she tries to hide, the way she avoids certain foods, the fatigue. I assume she was keeping it private until past the dangerous early months. Smart, really, given the circumstances." More lies, but coming from an unexpected source. Seraphine was providing corroboration, lending credibility to Liora's claim. Other nobles began murmuring agreement. Yes, now that they thought about it, the queen had looked pale lately. Had she not? The momentum shifted. What had been a desperate bluff became accepted truth, built on layered deceptions and willing belief. People wanted to believe in the possibility of an heir, in the continuation of stable rule. Kael's challenge offered only uncertainty and war. "Stand down, Kael," one of the northern lords said quietly. "This isn't the fight we prepared for." Kael's face twisted with rage and frustration. He'd been outmaneuvered, his perfect trap turned against him. For a long moment, Liora thought he might attack anyway. Consequences be damned. Then his hand left his sword hilt. "This isn't over," he said to Ronan. "You've bought yourself time, but if there's no child by winter, everyone will know this was a lie." "Then I suggest you prepare to bend knee to my heir," Ronan replied. "Because come winter, you'll have no choice." Kael and his men withdrew, their challenge deflated but their hostility intact. The ceremony limped to conclusion, nobles completing their pledges with obvious distraction. When it finally ended, Ronan pulled Liora aside into a private corridor. "There is no child," he said flatly. "I know. You lied to the entire court." "Yes." "Why?" Liora met his eyes steadily. "Because Kyle was right. He'd cornered us. We couldn't prove your control would hold under real threat. We couldn't demonstrate fertility without time. He was going to force civil war, and we had no counter." She took a breath. "So I gave us time. 7 months until winter. 7 months to figure out how to either make the lie true or survive its exposure." "And how exactly do you propose we do that?" "I don't know yet, but we're alive." Kyle is neutralized temporarily, and the kingdom believes in the possibility of an heir. That's better than where we were an hour ago. Ronan stared at her, then started laughing, a harsh, incredulous sound. "You magnificent, reckless fool! You just committed us to producing a miracle." "We've already survived one curse. How hard can pregnancy be?" "You have no idea." But his expression had shifted from anger to something like awe. "Everyone was right to underestimate you. You're far more dangerous than anyone suspected." Over the next weeks, maintaining the lie became Leora's full-time occupation. She worked with a trusted physician, one who owed Ronan favors and agreed to falsify records. She began wearing looser clothing, claiming early pregnancy discomfort. She carefully cultivated the appearance of someone carrying the kingdom's future. And she returned to the garden with renewed purpose, because if she couldn't actually produce an heir, she needed to demonstrate worth in other ways. The garden was thriving now. The winter roses had bloomed fully, their white petals bright against dark soil. The fountain ran clear, its mechanism mysteriously functional after years of being clogged. Even the ancient oak showed new growth, tiny green buds appearing on previously dead branches. "It's remarkable," Magistrave said, watching Liora work. 4 years of death, reversed in a month. How? Patience. Proper soil treatment. Removing the corruption at the roots. You're not talking about gardening anymore. No. Liora pruned a rose bush, her hand steady despite the conversation's weight. I'm talking about fixing what's broken. The garden died because shadows drained it. It's healing because the shadows are controlled now. Same principle applies to the kingdom. And when your lie is exposed, what then? Liora had wondered when Vey would confront her about the pregnancy. The woman was too perceptive to be fooled indefinitely. Then we deal with consequences, she said simply. But by then, maybe we'll have demonstrated enough value that the kingdom can't afford to lose us. Value? Vey's smile was slight. You mean you'll make yourself essential? Make the court dependent on you despite having no wolf, no child, no traditional sources of power. Something like that. You really are far cleverer than anyone realized. Vey studied her. Including your husband, I think. He chose you thinking you were controllable. Has he figured out yet that you're not? He's figuring it out. Liora moved to another plant. We both are. Turns out marriage between two people who thought they had each other measured is complicated. That night, Ronan found her in the garden again. The shadows followed him but stayed back, giving them space. He'd gotten better at controlling them, Liora noticed. They responded almost instinctively now, reading his intentions without requiring conscious command. Kyle's gathering support in the north, he said without preamble. My spies report he's telling lords the pregnancy is fabricated. By autumn, he'll have enough backing to move openly against us. Then we have until autumn to prove him wrong. About which part? The pregnancy or our legitimacy? Both, either. Whatever we can prove. She brushed soil from her hands. How long can you actually maintain control of the shadows? If real crisis comes, will they hold or slip? I don't know. They've never been tested under genuine threat. Everything so far has been controlled demonstration. Then we need to test them. Create a crisis we can manage before Kyle creates one we can't. Ronan moved closer, the shadows parting to let him through. What did you have in mind? The southern border. Raiders have been getting bolder, yes? Your reports mentioned increased attacks on frontier villages. Yes, but so we go there. You and me. The cursed king and his wolfless queen defending the realm from actual threat. If your control holds under real combat, it proves Kyle wrong. If it doesn't, she shrugged. Well, at least we'll know what we're dealing with. That's insane. You're claiming pregnancy. pregnant queens don't ride into border wars. This one does, because sitting in the castle waiting for Kael to move gives him all the advantage. But going south shows strength, shows the kingdom their king isn't hiding from his curse. He's using it to protect them. And if you get killed? Then I stop having to fake pregnancy, which honestly would be a relief at this point. Ronan stared at her, then shook his head. When I chose you, I thought I was getting someone safe. Someone quiet and forgettable who would fade into the background and cause no trouble. How's that working out for you? Terribly. But he was smiling. Prepare for travel. We leave for the southern border in 3 days. And Liora, try not to get yourself killed. I've grown inconveniently attached to having a queen who can actually stand beside me. The journey south took 5 days of hard riding. They traveled with a small force, 50 soldiers, all sworn to Ronan personally. Word spread ahead of them. The cursed king was leaving his castle, riding to war with his pregnant queen beside him. Frontier villages turned out to watch them pass, their expressions caught between hope and fear. The raiders struck on the 6th night. They came at dawn, 50 strong, pouring out of the hills toward a border village. The alarm went up, villagers scrambling for safety, Ronan's soldiers rushing to defensive positions. Liora found herself shoved behind a wagon by a protective guard while chaos erupted around her. "Stay down, Your Majesty. Let us handle this." But she could see Ronan at the center of the fighting, shadows exploding around him in response to genuine threat. They moved like living weapons, striking at raiders, deflecting blows, turning him into a force of destruction. His control held, but barely. She could see the strain in his posture, the way the shadows occasionally lashed out beyond his intention. This was the test. Real combat, real stakes, real emotion. If his control broke now, the shadows would consume everyone nearby. Soldiers, raiders, villagers, all of them drained of life before anyone could retreat. A raider broke through the defensive line, heading straight for the wagon where Liora hid. The guard beside her engaged, but the raider was stronger, faster. He knocked the guard aside and lunged toward her with his blade raised. Liora dove forward instead of back, rolling under his swing. Her hand found a fallen sword, too heavy for her, but she lifted it anyway, bringing it up in a desperate block as the raider struck again. The impact jarred her arms, nearly breaking her grip. "The queen!" someone shouted. "Protect the queen!" But Ronan's soldiers were engaged elsewhere, too far to reach her in time. The raider grinned, recognizing easy prey. He raised his sword for a killing blow. Shadows exploded across the space between them. They didn't attack the raider. They wrapped around Liora, pulling her backward, away from danger. At the same moment, Ronan appeared, moving with inhuman speed, his own blade taking the raider's head in a single strike. Then he was pulling her upright, his hands on her shoulders, shadows coiling protectively around them both. "Are you hurt?" "No, Stay. Behind. The. Lines." Each word was bitten off, fury and fear mixing in his voice. "You could have been killed. So could you. So could everyone here. That's how war works." The shadows surged, responding to his emotion. For a moment, Liora thought they would break free, consume everything nearby in violent hunger. This was the crisis moment. Real fear for her safety, real loss of control threatening. She did the only thing she could think of. She grabbed his face and kissed him. The shadows froze. Then slowly they retreated, not because Ronan commanded them, but because the contact grounded him. Reminded him who he was beyond the curse, pulled him back from the edge of losing control. When they broke apart, the shadows had settled into calm stillness. The battle still raged around them, but Ronan's control had stabilized. "That's cheating," he said roughly. "That's adaptation." She touched his face again. "Your control holds, even when you're terrified, even when genuine crisis threatens. The shadows obey you, not perfectly, but enough. That's what we needed to prove." The battle ended within the hour. The raiders retreated, bloodied and beaten, leaving behind their dead. Ronan's soldiers had taken casualties but held the line. And through it all, the cursed king had fought without his shadows slipping control, without draining his own people. The villagers emerged from hiding cautiously. An elder approached, old and weathered, falling to one knee before Ronan. "Your Majesty, we're honored. We never thought the crown would send forces to protect a border village." "I didn't send forces. I came myself." Ronan gestured to the soldiers. "These are just my guard. Tell me, How long have the raiders been attacking? Months, Your Majesty, since autumn. They come, take what they want, and disappear into the hills. We've sent to the capital for help, but you're just frontier villagers, not important enough for the crown's attention. Ronan's voice was grim. That changes now. I'm stationing soldiers here, permanent garrison, and any raiders who come back will find out what cursed shadows do to enemies of the realm. News of the battle spread faster than they traveled. By the time Ronan and Liora returned to the capital, the story had transformed. The cursed king riding to defend his weakest subjects, his shadows destroying raiders while protecting his own people, the wolfless queen standing beside him in battle despite carrying his heir. The narrative had shifted. Not completely. Kyle still commanded significant support, but enough that nobles began reconsidering their positions. A king who protected frontier villages was harder to paint as a monster. A queen who rode into combat was harder to dismiss as powerless. They returned to find the court transformed. Not in open allegiance, that would take more time, but in attitude. Servants met Leora's eyes now instead of looking away. Guards nodded respectfully instead of dismissing her presence. Even nobles who'd mocked her before offered careful courtesy. You've done it, Magistrate said, watching the court's changed dynamics. Made yourself essential. Made him appear strong instead of cursed. Shifted the power balance without anyone quite noticing until it was done. It's not done yet. Kale still has the north. But he's losing the center, and without the center, the north is just rebellion waiting to be crushed. Faye smiled slightly. You bought yourself time with the pregnancy lie. You're using that time brilliantly, but eventually you'll have to address the lie itself. Liora knew she was right. Autumn was approaching. In months, her supposed pregnancy would be undeniable, or its absence would be. She needed a solution, and she was running out of time to find one. The answer came from an unexpected source. 2 months after their return, a messenger arrived from Thorn Peak. Leora's former pack, the one that had sent her as an insult, requesting audience with the queen. Liora met them in a private chamber, curious what they could possibly want. 3 representatives appeared, including Elder Roark, the man who'd pronounced her wolfless all those years ago. They looked uncomfortable, out of place in the capital's grandeur. Your Majesty, Roark said, the title clearly painful for him. We come with difficult news. Then deliver it. Your mother, she's dying, winter fever, she's asking for you. Liora felt nothing. Her mother had turned away from her the moment she was declared wolfless, had let her become invisible, had allowed the pack to treat her as less than nothing. Why would she ask for her now? Why? She asked aloud. She says she has something to tell you, something about your birth. Roark looked deeply uncomfortable. She won't tell us. Says it's only for you. Liora considered refusing. Her mother had made her choice years ago, but curiosity won out. I'll come, but briefly. I have responsibilities here. Ronan insisted on accompanying her, bringing 20 guards. Thorn Peak proved even more bleak than Liora remembered. Wooden walls, muddy streets, winter's scars still visible despite spring's arrival. The pack gathered to watch their former outcast return as queen, their expressions caught between resentment and awe. Her mother lay in the healer's hut, withered by fever. Grandma attended her, the old healer's face lighting with surprised joy when Liora entered. Child, you came! Of course I came. Liora embraced her, the only person from this pack who'd shown her kindness. Then she moved to her mother's bedside. I'm here. What did you need to tell me? Her mother's eyes opened, still sharp despite the fever. You're not wolfless, she whispered. Liora froze. What? You were born different, not broken, different. The healer said you had something else inside you. Not wolf, but life force. Stronger than wolf, actually. Raw vitality. She coughed, struggling for breath. Your father wanted you exposed, called you a mistake, but I convinced him to let you live, to hide what you were. We told everyone you were wolfless because that was safer than the truth. What truth? Leora's hands shook. That you're a nurturer, rarest gift in 1,000 years. You don't take life, you give it. You can channel vitality into dying things and heal them, make dead land bloom, restore what's broken. Her mother's hand found Leora's. "I'm sorry I made you believe you were powerless. You're not. You never were. I was just afraid of what they'd do if they knew. Nurturers are valuable. Too valuable. You'd have been stolen, sold, forced to serve some noble's purposes. At least as wolfless, you were beneath notice." The world tilted. Everything Liora thought she understood about herself, wrong. She wasn't broken. She was different. And her mother, cruel as she'd seemed, had been protecting her the only way she knew how. Why tell me now? Because you're queen. You have power to protect yourself now. And because her mother's breathing grew labored. Because you'll need to know. When the child comes, a nurturer mother will birth a child stronger than any normal infant. Different, powerful. You need to be ready. She died with those words, her hand falling away from Leora's. Liora sat frozen, processing everything. She was a nurturer, not wolfless, differently gifted. And if her mother was right about the rest, she looked at Ronan, who'd heard everything from the doorway. "I might actually be able to have your child," she whispered. "Not through normal means, but if I'm a nurturer, if I can channel life force, you could nurture a pregnancy into being." Understanding dawned in his eyes. Turn the lie into truth. "Maybe. If the gift works that way. If I'm strong enough." She stood on shaking legs. "We need to return to the capital. Now. I need to test this." They rode back through the night, arriving at dawn. Liora went immediately to the garden, her laboratory, her testing ground. If she could nurture dead earth into life, could she nurture life into her own body? She knelt beside the ancient oak, pressing her palms to the soil, and for the first time she reached not just for the life in the earth, but for the life in herself. Felt for that force her mother had described, that vitality she'd always channeled unconsciously into dying things. It was there, deeper than wolf consciousness, different from shifter power, but undeniably present. A wellspring of pure life force, untapped and waiting. She pulled it forward, channeling it through her body, directing it with purpose toward the possibility of conception. If life could be coaxed into dead soil, if death could be reversed in withered plants, why not in her own flesh? The world went white. When she came back to herself, Ronan was holding her, the shadows wrapped protectively around them both. "What did you do?" Liora pressed a hand to her abdomen, feeling something different there. A spark. A beginning. "I think I actually made the lie true." It took 3 weeks to confirm. The physician who'd been falsifying records nearly collapsed when he examined her and found genuine signs of pregnancy. A child conceived through impossible means, nurtured into being through sheer force of will and rare gift. "This is—" He couldn't finish. "Your Majesty, this shouldn't be possible." "And yet," Liora said calmly. Word spread through the castle, then the kingdom. The wolfless queen was actually pregnant. The heir everyone doubted was real. And suddenly, Kael's accusations of lies looked like groundless attacks on a miracle. The Northern Lord arrived at court 3 days later, forced to bend knee before the throne, or openly declare rebellion. He chose the former, barely. "Congratulations, Your Majesty," he said to Liora, his voice dripping venom. "It seems I underestimated you." "Most people do," she replied. "It's my greatest advantage." 6 months later, as autumn turned toward winter, Liora gave birth to a daughter. The labor was agonizing, but she channeled her nurturer gift through every contraction, giving life to the child struggling to be born. When the infant finally emerged, crying, healthy, absolutely perfect, the gathered physicians could only stare in wonder. "She's strong," one murmured. "Stronger than any newborn I've ever seen. Look at her, already alert, already aware." Ronan held his daughter with careful awe, shadows retreating completely in the presence of new life. "What do we call her?" "Marianne," Liora said. "After the queen who died trying to save you. Let her name mean hope instead of loss." The coronation ceremony for Princess Marianne took place 1 week later. The entire kingdom gathered, nobles, common folk, even Lord Kael and his northern allies, all forced to acknowledge the heir they'd claimed impossible. Liora stood beside Ronan on the dais, their daughter held between them, and surveyed the assembled court. These people had dismissed her as worthless, had assumed she'd die like the previous queens. had bet on her failure at every turn. Instead, she'd transformed their cursed king into a ruler who commanded darkness as a weapon. She'd brought life back to dead gardens and dead kingdoms alike. She'd born an heir through impossible means, securing the succession everyone claimed couldn't be secured. She'd taken every weakness they'd scorned and turned it into strength they couldn't match. "People of the realm," Ronan's voice rang out, "I present Princess Marianne, heir to the crown. Proof that curses can be broken and strength comes in forms we don't expect. This child exists because a wolfless girl refused to accept impossibility. Because my queen saw a dead garden and decided to make it bloom. Because sometimes the weakest-looking things are actually the ones that survive when everything else dies." The court erupted in celebration, genuine this time, not polite courtesy. Even Kyle had to applaud, though his expression promised this wasn't finished between them. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today, Liora stood beside the king she'd saved and the daughter she'd willed into existence, and felt something she'd never experienced before: belonging. That night, alone in their chambers with shadows keeping gentle watch and their daughter sleeping peacefully nearby, Ronan pulled Liora close. "You know what you've done?" he asked quietly. "Survived? Rewritten the rules. Proven that power doesn't require claws and dominance. That the kingdom can be held together through resilience instead of fear." He kissed her forehead. "You didn't just break my curse, Liora. You broke the curse this entire realm has been under. The belief that only traditional strength matters. That anyone different is broken." "Good," she said simply. "Let them learn. Let every wolfless child growing up in frontier packs know they're not mistakes. Let every person dismissed as weak understand they might just be strong in ways no one's learned to measure yet." She moved to the window overlooking her garden, now fully alive and blooming even as winter approached. The ancient oak stood tall, its branches heavy with new growth. The roses climbed the fountain in riotous color. Life had returned to places of death. And in the castle, a new order was taking root. One that valued resilience over brutality, creativity over tradition, the strength to nurture life instead of just the power to take it. Liora Vance had been born without a wolf in a world that valued nothing else. She'd been dismissed, scorned, sent to the capital as an insult and a joke. She'd been chosen by a desperate king who thought she was controllable, expendable, utterly powerless. And she'd proven them all catastrophically wrong, not by becoming what they valued, but by forcing them to recognize worth in forms they'd never imagined. By taking everything they called weakness and transforming it into a different kind of strength entirely. The girl no one chose had become the queen no one could ignore, and the kingdom built on dominance and fear was learning, slowly, to value something more lasting. Hope, resilience, life nurtured in impossible circumstances. A garden blooming in winter, tended by hands they'd called powerless, proving that the most profound strength often lies in the ability to heal what everyone else has given up for dead.